Hey guys, Dtwo here with another deck guide, and this time it's going to be Tempo Mage. This is a relatively new deck. It's only been around for about a month, or it's been popular for about a month. People were experimenting with some of the cards in the deck, such as Flame Waker and Unstable Portal, so on and so forth. But it hasn't really been perfected or made really viable in this current meta until recently. I think the decks before this were a little bit too aggro focused. Now it's a little more mid range focused. And this deck is more or less taken over as the go to aggressive deck that Mage possesses. It's taken over that title from the Mech Mage, which it's not doing too well in this meta right now. And this deck is doing a little bit better. Obviously, the control Mage deck archetype would be the Freeze Mage. And there are many reasons why this deck has taken over. And all those reasons are basically because they do better in this current meta. And we'll talk about why a little bit later, but let's go over the cards in this deck without further ado. Let's go over the essential cards in this deck, the cards that you cannot be without. And those are first and foremost Flame Waker. Flame Waker being the newest card in the deck, the one that came from Blackrock Mountain. And that, along with Sorcerer's Apprentice and Unstable Portal, are what make the deck go. So basically, with the Unstable Portal, there's a lot of RNG involved with the deck, involved with the card. Um, but if you can give a little bit more benefit by playing it with something like Flame Waker, playing with something like Sorcerer's Apprentice, like all of a sudden, if it costs 1 mana and you're still discounting something for 3 mana, even if you get a somewhat poor card, it's still okay. Like as long as you're getting something 3 mana more, which is a really high chance you're going to get, then you're still fine. And you still might be able to tempo your opponent out of the game. And if you do happen to get a really nice card, then you can just win the game off that card itself. But being able to play with Sorcerer's Apprentice makes it so much better. Just the cost itself makes it so much easier to get out and allows you basically to tempo your opponent of the game a lot of times. Um, and the Flame Waker obviously allows that card to be played with a little bit of extra damage on the field, kind of a mini arcane missiles or 2/3 of an arcane missiles, just by playing with Flame Waker on the board. And that makes those two cards really, really dangerous for your opponent. It's something that your opponent has to get rid of really quickly. And if you combine that with things like Mana Worm, Mana Worm's a very good one drop, especially if you consider all the spells in this deck. That people have a hard time choosing which threatening minion to get rid of first. Mana Worm can continue to grow, continue to apply damage. Sorcerer's Apprentice can be really dangerous as well because of all of the spells you can get out. And Flame Waker just does a whole lot of damage, and it's very difficult to get rid of at 4 health for the 3 mana cost. Looking over the rest of the deck, I guess we can go over some more essential cards. You need the Frostballs, you need the Fireballs for that extra burst, for that extra late game damage. Also, it can be used for early removal if you really desperately need it, especially in those aggro versus aggro type matchups. Um, Flame Cannon is pretty essential. Sometimes you only play one. Azure Drake, you need that for the card draw. And Dr. Boom is just nice to have that as a upper end, to finish your point off. But strangely enough, this deck after that, maybe you could point to Mad Scientist and the secrets as well. They're just too good. If you're playing any sort of aggro deck, aggro mage deck, you're gonna need those Mad Scientists as an early option, and really make it difficult your point with Mirror Disease. But after those cards, it's really up to you what to put in the deck, which kind of makes this really unique. A lot of other decks, you have upwards of 25, 26, 27 cards that are completely necessary, and if you change even those, you're making a completely different deck, or you know, just you're teching it for a specific purpose, like maybe you're playing a certain tournament or something. So let's go over those flex cards. Starting off with Mirror Image. In the one spot you can also have Arcane Missiles. I feel like it's a little bit too RNG, and you're really the Arcane Missiles really only helps in aggro versus aggro matchups, whereas Mirror Image can help in both matchups. You can really get the upper hand in the aggro matchup by blocking off your opponent and being able to get some extra damage to face. Same thing works in control matchups where you can just, usually the opponent doesn't have very good early options to deal with several minions on board, and Mirror Image puts, automatically several minions on board. The Clockwork Gnome and the Yetis are a nod to Archmage's Antonidas. You get those spare parts, and you're able to make better use of Archmage Antonidas. Some decks like to put Emperor Thoris in the deck to make the spare parts cost 0 and just make Antonidas even better. But I found that with the high cost of him, um, generally speaking, in a control deck, playing him once makes your hand so much better. But in an aggressive deck, sometimes you don't have that many cards in hand anyway, and waiting to get that discount is you're basically losing tempo a lot of the time. So I decided to take him out. I decided to go with Lothar. Some of the cards like Azure Drake, they're pretty necessary. I need the card draw. Having the extra spell damage is really scary for opponent too. It's another threat to put on the board. The Arcane Intellects are nice. It makes the deck a little more consistent. It makes sure you don't run out of cards. It allows you to win some matchups, like control matchups, where you be dead in the water because you'd be drawing to your last cards, where that allows you to keep going. And along with Sorcerer's Apprentice, sometimes you can just get 2 cards for 2 mana, or even if you spam the board, flood the board with Sorcerer's Apprentice, maybe you get 2 cards for 1 mana. Flame Cannon, you can put 2, you can put 1. It's just nice having the guaranteed early game just tempo advantage, because you almost guaranteed kill whatever your opponent puts on the board. And again, the Archmage Antonidas that pairs up with the spare parts. It just allows you another way to finish the game off at the end, or toward the middle, I should say, when you're. Since it's a mid-range kind of deck, that's why I say middle. But it would be the end of the game if you finish it off, obviously. But yeah, just have something extra where your opponent sometimes thinks, it's over. They think they stabilize, but nope, you have Archmage Antonidas and some spare parts, and they have to worry about, 6, 12, maybe 18 damage toward that 9 mana, 10 mana spot. And yeah, you can also put Counterspell in as another card. You could put Flame Strike in, but I feel like putting that card in is a little bit too defensive. You're not. The goal of the deck is to gain the early tempo advantage, and if you don't get it early, you're probably just going to lose anyway. Although it is an option, you can put it in just to have reverse some games. Sometimes your opponent doesn't expect it. So yeah, that's about it for the early explanation of the cards. Let me put this off to the side for just a second so that we can go over some of the matchups. And okay, all right. So starting off with Druid, Tempo Mage is a very good matchup against Druid because Druid has a hard time dealing with aggressive decks that like to flood the board. They don't have very good removal options. They have some, but those aren't usually played in their decks. To be quite frank, it's usually just Wrath. It's usually just Swipe. It's for the most part you try to ramp and try to get bigger minions before your opponent does, and it doesn't work all the time. Against Hunter, it's a pretty even matchup. It depends on who gets the earlier start. Whoever starts faster basically wins, which means that it's a little better matchup for Tempo Mage against mid-range Hunter. It's not quite as good against something like Face Hunter or Hybrid Hunter. Although Face Hunter, sometimes they draw all of their charge minions, and if you have a mirror image up or something like that, it helps a lot. And your hero power can really help against those things with 1 mana. So I think Hybrid Hunter is probably the worst matchup of the 3, and then Face Hunter, and then Mid-range Hunter is probably the better matchup because you can often tempo them out of the game before they can get a good start. It's a good matchup against Mech Mage because you have your Flame Waker faster than they can get the Goblin Blast Mage, and your minions are a little bit more beefy than theirs. For instance, Cogmaster does not match up very well against Mana Worm, stuff like that. And as the name suggests, you can typically tempo of the game. It's a bad matchup against Freeze Mage because you don't have any silences. I have Lothar in my deck, which helps a lot. Most decks do not, so my deck would be a little better against Freeze Mage, but overall, they can stall just long enough to where you're gonna run out of ammunition and just they will win the game. Against Paladin, It's a little bit of a poor matchup in my experience. I haven't seen any statistics run, but just running it, like if Paladin gets their early options to deal with your threats, then they can kind of take tempo themselves. But it's definitely not a matchup which is completely hopeless. I would say it's definitely over the 40% range, but I would say it's probably under 50%. Priest is a pretty bad matchup because they have just endless ways to remove your threats. They have things like Light Bomb. If they don't have Light Bomb, they have Akanai Circle. They have things like Shadow Madness, which your deck is very susceptible to. The things like Holy Nova, which your deck is susceptible to. The good news is that Priest isn't very good against other classes, so hopefully you won't see many Priests on the ladder. Rogue is a decent matchup. You just need to like tempo them up before they get a decent Blade Flurry, but you have some staying power, particularly if your Unstable Portal develops something that they can't really deal with. Although they can sap it. If you get it down early enough, maybe that's their entire turn. Rogue has some decent options though. For the most part, so I would say I'm kind of backtracking what I said earlier, but it might be a little bit unfavorable. Now that I think about it more in depth. In my case, with my experience with the deck, I've had a decent time with it. But just looking at from the rogue's perspective, they have some ways to deal with your threats. So yeah, I would say it's not the worst matchup. Just thinking about the cards, but I guess the worst thing the best way to take advantage of the rogue would be to have Flamekins to deal with the early threats, and to have the Mad Scientist to make it so they can't play any minions. So depending on the start you get, yeah, now it's kind of going back and forth on this. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth on this matchup. Again, this is a relatively new deck, so it's a lot of theory crafting about which matchups are good. But it can really go either way, and it really depends on the start of the game. So I would say it's not completely favored for either matchup, and definitely something that's winnable. Um, and let's go to Shaman. Most of the time, people are playing Mech Shaman these days. You don't see a lot of normal Shaman. Normal Shaman has a lot of removal to maybe get rid of your threats, but at the same time, they're probably gonna. It's kind of hard for them to keep removing your stuff, especially because if they have all the removal in their hands, they're not really getting stuff on the board, and all your minions can take out totems pretty easily and maybe tempo out of the game. So, mid-range Shaman, the normal control-y mid-range Shaman isn't the best. Mech Shaman depends heavily on who gets the early tempo. Particularly with Power Mace, if they get the Power Mace off and get one of the guys bigger, you have no silence, so you're gonna have to use something like a Fireball to get rid of it, which is really unfortunate. So basically whoever gets the faster start. So it's relative. It's reasonable to say it's a close matchup. Going into Warlock, this is a very bad deck in my experience against Handlock because they have a lot of ways to basically stop you. If they get their AoE spells, if they get their big minions, it's hard to. Okay, let me just rephrase this a little bit. A lot of times, your opponent has ways to deal with your minions, but sometimes if you put things like a mirror image out and you put things like Flame Waker out, it's a little bit hard to kill. But if you're Handlock, as long as you don't take a lot of damage in the early game from something like Mana Worm, Coin, something, then at the end of the day they're fine because they can just play their big minions and heal up eventually, and they just won't die. And they have the AoE to clear your board, and they have things like Dark Bomb to potentially deal with early threats. Zulog is a decent matchup. A lot of times you can get the early lead. If you don't get the early lead, you're probably going to die because they have better hero power than you. They can basically just keep drawing cards. Well, you can't unless you're using things like Arcane Intellect. But a lot of times it's not too hard to get the early lead from Zoo. Depends on how fast of a Zoo they play, though, obviously. Warrior Grim Patient is not the best matchup. If they can survive long enough, basically they can take back the game from you by playing things like just turn 8. As long as they survive to turn 8, they go Morse Commander Grim Patron, and they clear most, if not all, of your board. So that is not a very good matchup. Control Warrior has a lot to do with whether or not they draw Fiery War Axe. And if they don't, you usually win. If they do, usually lose. But I'd say overall, since you're not going to draw Fiery War Axe more than 50% of the time, that it's a good matchup against Control Warrior. So there you have it. A lot of decent matchups, and I know it kind of went back and forth. I said some of them were good matchups, some were bad matchups. But if you look at what decks are popular in the meta right now, it ends up being decent because a lot of people are playing combo decks and so on and so forth. So this deck allows you to just get ahead of the tempo and just get a nice free win here and there. It's nice to have. It's also a nice deck to have in a tournament, just as just mix up in your decks. Maybe you play Grim Patron and Handlock, and then you throw a Tempo Mage at them, and it's just something that I can't really deal with. So, without further ado, let's get into games. It is June 5th here in Japan. So, in other words, the start of the season. I was playing around this deck, learning the ins and outs of it early this season after playing a lot of Grim Patron Warrior last season, and we'll see how this goes. Can probably get a couple games in. We're at 15 minutes right now, so it depends on how long these games go. Alright. So Hunter right off the bat, I'm going to keep all of these cards. This is 100% keep against almost any class no matter what. But in particular against aggro, although I just said no matter what. But it's just extremely good against aggro because of the 3 health. The mirror image will block him out. He does have, as a hunter, he has access to Unleash the Hounds, but that doesn't really matter early game because obviously they only would do 1 damage, so they can't actually kill these things. I'm also going to keep Frostwall to deal with maybe early minions since I have an opening hand. And Unstable Portal is nice to get that early tempo as well. You want to keep this early game. A lot of times I might not keep Frostbolt if I had 2 spells in my hand. Say that one of these. Say for instance if this was the hold on a second. This is a pretty annoying play for Hunter to deal with. But say this is the a Flame Cannon instead of a Frostbolt, I would decide to keep only 1. You don't want to have too many spells in your hand. This is basically a minion, and it buffs this guy. So I decided to keep this because it's a minion, this is because it's a spell, but if you have too many spells, it's not the greatest situation. So we can clear our mirror images next turn, but we're going to go ahead and ignore it and then just play this. We could play this, but it's kind of a waste of 4 damage onto his face. Mech Bearcat's a very decent card. It's especially in this matchup, he's unlikely to have the 7 damage necessary, or he's not going to have Big Game Hunter, I should say. But he's also not going to have a very good way to deal with this unless he has Hunter's Mark. On the other hand, he has had a good start as well. 1 drop into 2 drop, this was exactly what you want. So this game is not over yet. We've had a very good start, but so has he. So something to be a little bit careful. We're probably going to play this regardless of what happens, because it's on curve. It's just really nice. Playing this is a little bit of an issue. So he decides to go ahead and play the Unleash the Hounds just so he can get rid of our board. Otherwise, it's a little bit annoying for him. So he's going to go ahead and pop the Death Rattles in those. Unfortunately, that could very well be Freezing Trap, so we might be in a little bit of trouble. I don't think I can attack with this. And I can't really test it because I'm not a rogue or anything like that. So this looks like Hybrid Hunter, or at the very least Mid-range Hunter or Hybrid Hunter, which means this is likely to be Freezing Trap, which is an issue. So, and we've drawn all spells, which is not very good. We can kind of start clearing his board, but it's not the best. I really don't want to attack with this. I really need a small minion to play, so my early game was very good, but right now it's just really poor. I can't really do anything. He might be baiting me into trying to attack with this, and maybe it gets frozen back. But at 6 mana, if it gets frozen back, I'm never going to be able to play it again. So this game has gone pretty poorly. It started out very well, but then we drew all these cards in a row, and that one Frostbolt helped us clear the pile of cheddar. So I can't really say that was a mistake, but the having these drawing the flame cannon, fireball, Frostbolt in a row is pretty unfortunate. We do get a lot of spare parts out of this though, which we can play for free with our Sorcerer's Apprentice. So that's a silver lining. Very unfortunate there. He's gonna give us more spare parts. I think we're gonna finally attack with this. We kind of need to see what it is, and at this point, yeah. And if it's snakes, then it's fine. And it being on the board was nice because it absorbed some shots, gave us some service parts, so that's good. But for now, what we need to do is start getting rid of some of this stuff. I have 2 flame cannons. I feel like I might be able to just go RNG this, since I'm pretty far behind. Oh, he does have 2 cards in hand, so maybe I don't need to. I'm pretty sure I need to get rid of this somehow. I can ping and flame cannon and frostbolt and free something. So, you know, we're just gonna go for the RNG route, because we're really far behind on the board. We want to just take a chance here, and I don't know if we have the opportunity to play all these cards anyway. So, yeah, let's go for it. Missed, it's fine. I mean, that's what we're expecting anyway. And then let's do that. We're basically looking for the 1 in 3 chance to have a very, very good outcome. It didn't work out for us, but I think it was worth it. So this is not an obvious turn. I mean, I could maybe, you know, I guess I could have gone for RNG that turn as well and just try to go for the 50-50. But if he doesn't play anything large, then maybe I can just get the guaranteed kill at next turn and just eat the 4 damage this turn. Maybe not. Okay, so I think the play is just going to be Mana Worm, Flamekin, no matter what. I'm just going to hope that it hits the bear. We got it, which is good. We're getting really low on health though, and we've used 2 Frostbolts and the Fireball, so we don't have any way to burst. Our opponent would be best served going for face here. Yep. And we're in a lot of trouble. This would have been very nice last turn. Or at any point in the game to have caught the Mad Scientist. Let's see. So we did have 2. Okay. Interesting. So this is tough because we needed to kill him at some point. We can't actually kill this. I guess we just do that. Actually, no, what we could have done is played this, had it die, and play something else. Now we kind of forced to play this, and it gets frozen anyway. So that went really poorly. Actually, we're 100% dead now, so we're just gonna concede. There's really nothing we could have done there to come back. We just had a really poor start, and it's just unfortunate. Oh, we had a good start, but we had a very poor sequence of events after that. He happened to have one of the better responses to our start, which was 1-drop into 2-drop into removal 3-drop. And after that we drew spell, 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 spell. And spells that really don't deal with having a lot of minions on the board for our opponent. So that's just unfortunate, it happens. Go to the next game. And we're going to go ahead and keep this card and this card. You don't really want to keep Fireball for removal, especially in this matchup, which is going to be kind of tit for tat in the early game. So we got a lot of early minions, which is decent. And this is kind of a tough situation because waiting till turn 3, going second to be able to play the coin, it can be pretty devastating to get a coin coin mirror image off with this guy on the board, having all that damage on the board. But it might take too long to get off, so it's going to be a little bit of a tricky kind of balancing act. How quick do I want to get this guy out? So I think I'm going to go with this. And the next turn, this makes all my spells obviously cheaper. The question is, do I want to play this or this first? And I think the answer is that I want to play this first, so that I can make this guy bigger. So we're removing, we missed out on 2 damage to his face, but we made this guy 1 bigger, which allows us to be a pretty big threat going forward. And we want as many threats on the board as possible. So that's obviously a good card for him to get in this situation. We could have thought about playing this, but not super necessary. I'm gonna go ahead and play this first. Okay, we're gonna play this next because we have no. Since we have no spells in our hand, we actually want to trade this in here. And if we get the requisite hits off, we're gonna just run this guy into it. This guy's could become more important to this guy at this moment. Okay, so unfortunately we did not get the hits off, which means we're probably just gonna have to trade this guy in, or not. Let's see, what kind of damage can he do with this guy? The worst possible thing he could do is Arcane Explosion, but it's highly unlikely that's in this deck. I think actually we're just going to play it extremely risky, but aggressively, and just go for the face. Since there's not much that he can do with this guy at the moment anyway. And missing out on the 6 damage is a really high price to pay. Oh. We didn't have any space on the board. That was my mistake. Whoops. I was wondering why that didn't go off. Anyway, I think we have lethal on board, don't we? Yeah, so slight mistake, we filled out the board too much. But the game is over. To be honest, it didn't really matter what he played, because if he played a minion, if he played some sort of top minion, we're going to win the game anyway. Which Sludge Bolter is basically the biggest top minion you could put on the board. So that's basically the dream situation where your opponent has no response, and you flood the board and you kill them very, very quickly. Yeah, so that will do it for Tempo Mage. Sorry we were only able to play 2 games there. Don't really have time for another one, unfortunately. 1 loss versus Hunter, 1 win versus a mage, and it just shows you how the deck works. Basically, if you get a decent starting hand, you can basically make it so that your opponent cannot win. If you get a poor start, then sometimes you're dead in the water. And that's basically how the deck works, just to put it bluntly and simply. So have fun out there. Hopefully you enjoy the deck, and I'll see you guys next time.